Inconceivable. Excuses are for it. But don't think of this what you're thinking is.
Hey, thank you guys so much for sharing my videos and for all the likes and for subscribing. And if you're watching me again, I would appreciate it. But I was a little curious, and so I did like search myself on YouTube and search, literally my name, Deborah Hatfield, and photograph of Joseph Smith. And sometimes I go by Ann. It was my legal name as well, middle name. But and then what came up was a short by Michelle Stone, and I mostly just kept finding stuff about her. I'm like, why? What is going on with the algorithm? It just really is a curious thing. I'm not sure if it's just in the comments, but I don't, I've wanted to respond to her on occasion, and I feel sorry for her and her pain and torture and misery from believing an untruth. But it blurs the meaning of things as she's reading the voice of innocence, which I've read, I mean, not literally, but like, feels like 1,000 times over and over. And it just is very clear that these words, polygamy, it's almost always denounced in anyone being quoted from, like 1846, 47 when they went to Utah to 1890 or even, 2012. Eventually, I think Brigham Young did say, okay, yes, it's celestial plural marriage is similar. I guess you could call it polygamy, but they would say no. Joseph Smith III's like, okay, yeah, plural marriage, even though polygamy basically means the same thing. But in Nauvoo 1840, it didn't. It meant spiritual wifery, which was abuse and trafficking, SA of women. But it just even in this, I was literally just trying to find them explaining or and I've found enough that I understand and understand what words meant. If you understand what like polygamy, spiritual wifery in the 1840s basically meant the same thing, but then it later on became codified to mean one man more than one wife. But back then that word was scary. It was like concurrent in the spiritual wifery where women were in communes and passed from guy to guy, which I have to understand my audience. So if you're like a woman and you've had 12 ex-husbands, oh my goodness, that's going to offend you. But if I don't know that you've gone from guy to guy, you've had a lot of men in your life, but people can change. But it was just my whole explanation. I know has always been like, it's not good for women to have children with a bunch of men, but if you've had children with a bunch of men, I believe someone was offended, and it led to a lot of things being said about me that weren't true. I might talk to you a little bit later. I've mentioned recently and just shared a little bit that I felt safe to do. I have a bishop that's a lawyer and just got a little bit of sound advice, and tried to follow it the best I could. I wouldn't say Michelle Stone ruined my life, but I do think I've experienced extreme contention and rage from someone that was very mad. Just me sharing truth. This is Foundations of Restoration from the Church of Jesus Christ.org. It's just one of the lessons 20 in there, and it's several pages long. And I searched polygamy, it's not in there because we call it plural marriage, but they did not want to call it polygamy, right? So when they use the word polygamy in a speech in 1840, they're talking about spiritual wifery, guys. They're not just talking about plural marriage. And a lot of church historians don't like to talk about the bad stuff. Even David on Saints Inscripted tried to get some of the Joseph papers to talk about these things, and he watered down spiritual wifery. And it still fires me up because it's destroying testimonies. I don't think they get that. And I get their perspective that they don't want to talk about really bad things, but they know. And I don't think they're bad. I do not think the Joseph Smith papers are bad. This is from the Joseph Smith papers. I love that this millionaire spent all of his money right before he died and got all of these hands on deck and professionals to do this because it was so needed, because we need to be our own researchers. And it's okay. The first president said this is good. Good has come. And some people told me I've done some good, so I just hold on to that, and I appreciate the likes and follows and support I've received, you guys. But I'm going to not read every word. Someone accused me of talking about super disturbing things, but they were bringing up some disturbing things Michelle Stone brought. I only watched 5 minutes of her video, and then they coerced me to talk about it. They accused the opposite later, but this person was bringing her up and wanted me to talk about it. But I guess because with someone else I talked about it, but it's just, if I've just made a ton of videos about it and that's all anyone brings up in the comment sections, like, and if I ever bring it up with someone, my intent is to help someone's testimony, you guys. That's it. I believe seeing the contrast that there's something way worse than plural marriage. And Michelle Stone doesn't see the numbers. She doesn't think there was any benefit from plural marriage. And I just disagree. I don't think she's a horrible person, but I don't think she's either acknowledging it all or understanding or believing because of the people she's communicating with. But I found peace understanding that it is a numbers thing. They needed large numbers of missionaries in a short amount of time. That's Helen Mar Kimball saying, I believe that. I agree with that. It wasn't just numbers of men being thrown off and more women from men dying in Nauvoo. I don't agree with Brian C. Hills that there weren't that many widows, because Hiram Smith says there were a lot of widows. There were a lot. And they were targeted by abusers. I'm not going to read all these words, but it is in a letter from Joseph to Emma Smith that there was SA and trafficking, S-word trafficking happening in Nauvoo, as he is being now become, and we're going to go backtrack a little bit in a minute here, but he, took action against J.C. Bennett, who was living spiritual wifery. And Chauncey Higby was excommunicated as well. I guess J.C. Bennett sort of wrote his name out because he was too prideful, but he was going to get excommunicated anyway, right? And Oliver Cowdery sort of did the same thing, but Chauncey was excommunicated, and too many men spiritually died. And sadly, if you understand, Chauncey was only 20, and he didn't get married till his 30s. Like, he was part of the Nauvoo Legion, and J.C. Bennett ran the Nauvoo Legion. You understand? It makes sense a lot of young men joined that. And then Helen Mar Kimball, her father, like, ooh, am I going to find a suitable man for her? Is she going to get abused? Is she going to get passed from guy to guy? She alludes to that. So when you understand the bad things, I think it can help your testimony. It helped mine. It didn't destroy my testimony reading the memoirs of President Joseph III, but it might yours. I don't know. But he's in hiding because John C. Bennett is just like, well, everything Joseph Smith said about me, that's what he's doing. That's what he's doing. And that wasn't enough. He needed to accuse Joseph Smith, most of you probably know, of trying to end the life of Governor Boggs by his best, protector. And he had people that did have that. He needed people with guns to protect his life. People were trying to kill Joseph Smith. And so one of those, they were trying to extradite Joseph, and his friend, unfortunately, a brain fog, unless I've just researched and looked up the name, but like he did end up actually in jail out there, but then he was acquitted because he did not, they had no evidence that anyone connected to Joseph Smith tried to kill Governor Boggs, but the guilty lie. Sometimes they lie really well, and they try to accuse you of doing exactly what he's doing. Oh my goodness, and all these people are starting to believe it, right? But the accusation was of spiritual wifery, of Joseph living free love, and him actually fighting it and trying to protect some of these women whose husbands did that and are wanting eternal marriage and celestial marriage, and then that looks like it, but like and I do think he messed up in these eternity only sealings, which there's no physicality though, and there's no in this life anything happening, right? But in this letter, Joseph Hugh just wants to get out of town for 6 months because he's gone, and we'll go over the trial that happened in May 1842. But he's just sick of it all, and he's tired. He doesn't want to. He's terrified too, you guys, and I'm sure he is, and all the saints are. You need to understand that perspective. They are so scared. And he wants to go away for 6 months and get on. He's talking about getting on the ship, going up the Mississippi River, and towering the mountains and rocks, and shall remind us of the place of our nativity, and shall look like safety and home And then we will bid defiance to the world, to Carlin, Boggs, Governor Boggs, and Bennett, but it's very clear that they're like colluding, and I agree with that. But Joseph, he was totally found not guilty of this whole accusation, all of them, and I agree, of spiritual wifery and of trying to end the life of Governor Boggs. I found too many quotes of people in Missouri telling other Missourians, some, not all of them were horrible, but one member of the church did say that they credited Joseph Smith for them not fighting physically or trying to, because the abuse was awful in Missouri. It was absolutely awful. And they were being starved to death. It was just so bad. But anyway, and all their, basically the word trafficked women, I mean, I guess you could take it differently than I do, but I do see this as a reference to that there were women being trafficked, and sorry being called that word. And there's a lot of things I will not say verbally and didn't in spring of 2020, but and then we've got Memoirs of President Joseph Smith III, where on page 70 to 71, you guys, he's actually praying about whether he should live plural marriage and go to Utah. And he's like, which group should I join? And praying about it. Who do you think is telling him to do that? Emma. And he said, I sought earnestly to determine where to cast my religious lot. Should I? And of course, he's going to defend, because this is after the fact, and he ran the organization after this. We know what his choice was, but he did pray about it. Which body believers shall I unite myself? Whoops, this page. And then Joseph Smith III continues on, and it's even more blatant here. And he talks about Brigham Young, and should I subscribe? Should I live plural marriage? I could not, but he couldn't admit it. He couldn't be sincere about it. And it doesn't work like that. And I don't think God would have said, yeah, go join Brigham Young so you can live polygamy, which is now codified to mean the same thing as plural marriage, but again in 1840 did not mean the same thing. Should I get rebaptized? Like, you guys, if Emma was really like that this whole conspiracy was true, and that she never lived plural marriage with Joseph Smith, would she let her son pray about plural marriage and joining Brigham Young? And so Vienna Jackie's, I think Joseph Smith III quotes her well enough. And so I think some church historians or whatever just don't read enough of what I say, or what I watch enough of what I see. I think he's a good alternate source for anyone that's struggling with their testimony, wanting to see different sources and seeing, like Michelle Stone, but like she's going to read words differently and probably continue her way. But I do think there's a chance you might know what words mean, and it actually might strengthen your testimony, because I think he quotes her well enough that the evidence is there. If you understand what words meant, and they meant something, that spiritual wifery wasn't the same thing, because Michelle's blurring this in this short, that spiritual wifery and trafficking and polygamy and what it means today is what she's implying, because she's not differentiating it. Because Emma used the word polygamy. The meaning of the word changed, you guys. Okay, he quotes her well enough. It is faith promoting. So then we go to page 170. So I didn't lose my testimony reading Members President Joseph Smith III, because I think he's a good source of someone that did not follow Brigham Young, but is still quoting Utahns well enough. Not perfectly, you guys, and I acknowledge that. But we also need to have a little more respect for him, that he wasn't that bad of a guy. He quotes them well enough that I think it could help save some people from falling into all this confusion. Okay, so on page 170, he's talking to Vienna Jackie's. And she was like an old maid. She didn't really get married, but she talks favorably and she's calm. This is important. Plural marriage is okay. So she doesn't and I do think there's a whole column of conversation I think is distorted, and I think things are left out. And it is, I would accuse Joseph III of leaving things out, maybe being a little bit manipulative to promote, but he also is very staunch in his ways. Like, he wouldn't even consider that any of these things could be lived correctly, or that people in Utah aren't that bad, right? But then he's like, why didn't you just live polygamy? Why didn't you plural wife? To my surprise, she became intense and sober in her tears and her eyes and trembling. So she's crying, and she's bringing up Brother Joseph, and talking about the Relief Society and the times. And he's like, I remember the times and seasons. I don't think I think he brought up the word spiritual wife and asked her about that. That's my opinion. Because she then says at one of the meetings of society, okay, when your mother was not present, the subject of spiritual wifery came up as a matter. And then it's very clear to me that this is not the same as plural marriage. And this talk and speculation, and some said that could be taught. I don't think this is a really accurate quote in that sentence, right? I consider it to be a relation of such high. But anyway, I'll just go in. I don't think it's quoted perfectly, is my opinion, but I think it matches the Voice of Innocence of Nauvoo that Emma edited. And a letter from Joseph Smith, I think, supports this. But you understand they're talking about spiritual wifery, which was not plural marriage. It was trafficking women. It was free love. And I'm going to show the High Council minutes to show how abusive Higby was. And the Nauvoo neighbor, May 29th, 1844, they out him, and they soften the words of the women, and so that it's appropriate for the public. But the High Council minutes are it is disturbing. It's upsetting. But Michelle Stone also brings up just as disturbing stuff, if not worse, that it causes such anxiety in people and negative emotions. I don't think it's good, but I think she's confused. You guys, I do. So allegedly, Jackie says, the next day I visited your mother at her home and had a talk with her. She told me that she asked her husband, the prophet, about the stories which were being circulated among the women concerning such a doctrine, spiritual wifery. She's talking about spiritual wifery. She had just defended plural marriage. Jackie's did. And that he told her to tell the sisters, the society, that if any man, no matter who he was, undertook to talk such things to them in the houses, to just order them out at once. And if he did not go immediately, to take the tongs or the broom and drive him out, for the whole idea was absolutely false and the doctrine was evil and an unlawful thing. I don't think he understands how different spiritual wifery was. But she's whispering at this point. And I think that's the problem. And I don't think we should continue to do that today. And so continuing on. Here's the High Council minutes, but you see there it starts in May 1842, where they start excommunicating these men for spiritual wifery. And it's not unauthorized plural marriage. It is unauthorized polygamy, because polygamy meant spiritual wifery. And I think even church historians are confused by this, you guys. 100%. Reading some stuff on the church's website, I'm like, they're confused. They're not perfect people. I don't think it's a conspiracy that they're bad people. But I also think they're too scared to talk about some of the bad stuff. But then this understanding that there's something so much worse than plural marriage, it makes it look benign. And I think there was a purpose in it. And I think the numbers make sense that when we get into this, a lot of men spiritually died. So then there are a lot more good women. And we need, a bunch of missionaries by a certain date and time. Holy Father, I have a testimony of why it was needed. Okay. But what Vienna Jackies wrote is echoed by this letter. You can go to Joseph Smith Papers and read this. Please do it. 31st of March, 1842, can the Relief Society of Nauvoo be trusted with some important matters that ought to actually belong to them, to see which men have been under the necessity seen to their chagrin and mortification in order to prevent iniquitous characters. I mean, yes, spiritual wifery is never going to be okay. It wasn't okay back then. From carrying their iniquity in effect, such as, for instance, a man who may be aspiring for power and authority. John C. Bennett had become mayor, the leader of the Nauvoo Legion. He also was running a university. He's describing John C. Bennett, you guys. regardless of God, man, or the devil, or the interest of welfare of men, or the virtue or innocence of women, shall the credulity, good faith, and steadfast feelings of sisters for the cause of God or truth be imposed upon by believing such men, because they say they have authority from Joseph or the first presidency or any other presidency of the church, and thus with a lie in their mouth deceive and debauch the innocent under the assumption that they are authorized from these sources. May God forbid, because that is exactly what Chauncey is quoted as saying. He's using the first presidency to get widows and young women to physically be with him. No commitment, no ceremony. This is not celestial plural marriage. This is straight up abuse, and it is spiritual wifery because he uses that. Spiritual wifery is okay. You know what that is, right? Joseph lives that. He didn't, you guys. But he did live plural marriage. We've been informed that some unprincipled men, whose names we will not mention at present, have been guilty of such crimes, denounce them, and they do officially do that as a whole church 2 years later, as such, and fly and shun them as the fiery serpents. Now, beloved sisters, do not believe for a moment that we wish to impose upon you. We actually do know that such things exist in the church, and we are sorry. John C. Bennett was the first counselor and the first president temporarily because the official ones were traveling and going to England, okay? It was a horrific time. And I have a hard time, even in 2020, you just worry. You know, you find out about bishops and even stake presidents being into things kind of like Chauncey, okay? And as a woman, you want there to be good men in the church. You want them to have the spirit of discernment and to be able to have the Holy Spirit with them because they're doing what's right enough. They don't have to be perfect, yeah, but do what's right enough to be able to have the Spirit with you and be able to lead your little flock and to help you move and protect you from scary, mean people in extremist groups, but then they don't. And it's scary and it hurts you and it hurt me. And I'm going to make a weird noise because I'm going to plug in my computer. You can see what's written here, but I'll read it anyway again because I want to help testimonies. I'm not trying to hurt people's feelings. I'm not trying to hurt Michelle. I want her to stop crying and having misery. I want her to be happy again. Even though she smiles, I think she could be a lot happier. Just acknowledge how awful spiritual wifery was. And then that word meant polygamy until it didn't. Which today is that it didn't. Because today, polygamy doesn't mean spiritual wifery. But it did back then, okay? And they did fight spiritual wifery. And spiritual wifery did affect the numbers of good men in the church, and that we are obliged to make mention of any such thing. I want to put a stop to them, and we want you to do your part. And I'm going to show the High Councilman and show evidence of all this, and our part to wish to keep the commandments of God in all things, given directly from heaven. Because when you're living plural marriage, you are committed to a man. You're not being abused. Spiritual wifery is the opposite, and you'll see that later. I'll just show you Eliza R. Snow, because the whole Relief Society from heaven living, and it's signed by Joseph Smith Brigham Young. Brigham Young denounced spiritual wifery. So did Parley P. Pratt, as he is admitting to being a man having more than one wife. Not the same thing. And the whole Relief Society is then accused because they are helping fight John C. Bennett's abuse and prostitution of women in Nauvoo. Now I won't be monetized, but I'm not anyway, so who cares? But they were accused by John C. Bennett of living spiritual wifery and doing exactly what he did. But then liars and guilty, he's out there saying, Joseph is accusing me of this. But that's what he's doing, you guys. That's what Joseph Smith is doing. And that wasn't enough, because liars, it's never enough. They got to amp it up to a disturbing, horrifying level, which I have experienced. I'll just be honest there. And I have documents showing evidence is not, it just, my old bishop was a lawyer, and I mean, not my lawyer, and if he's wrong, whatever, but I just felt, okay, some official documents redacted, I was able to show, sorry, but it wasn't enough. He needed to accuse Joseph Smith of threatening the life of Governor Boggs, as we saw in that letter, and that's why he was in hiding by August, because they wanted to hold a trial, and he knew he wouldn't get a fair trial. He was terrified. And John C. Bennett knew that, and so did Chauncey. It was so disgusting, his letters to him. If you read the history of the saints by John, it's disgusting. And you know he's guilty. You know he hates the Relief Society. But they're being accused of passing themselves around from guy to guy and having other women go from guy to guy. No. Plural marriage is the opposite, you guys. It's totally different. And so when Eliza R. Snow is confronted for denying this and signing this document saying we are not a part of this secret wife system that John C. Bennett is accusing us of, they're talking about spiritual wifery. So let's go to the blue part where, right here. And so this is like a 30, because I actually recorded the video and then it just didn't upload right. So I'm just redoing this without showing my face this time. And Eliza R. Snow, and so all these women were refuting Bennett's claims as foul and infamous slander upon an innocent people. And spiritual wifery is way more foul and it is infamous slander. That you're like being SA by Joseph Smith and P word, and you are he was talking about the WHORE is of women connected to Bennett, but he had compassion for them in the whole first presidency when they are using spirit discernment, and definitely 2 years later, they are all clearly being described as victims. Okay, they're not being victim shamed, and let's not victim shame, you guys. And this is from the Church Historian Press that I'm quoting right here. That's why it's in quotation marks. And they said at least 3 of the undersigned women have first-hand experience with plural marriage. Eliza R. Snow was sealed to Joseph Smith. Okay, Sarah and Whitney in signing the statement. These women likely saw it differently. Okay, right. And then we're gonna show you what right there. So Eliza R. Snow responded to this. She said at the time. So this is Church Historian Press. I'll put the link in here, but you can see the link there. The Sisters of the Relief Society signed our article. I was married to the prophet. We made no allusion to any other system of marriage than Bennett's. His was prostitution, and it was truly his. Listen, Michelle. Please, please listen. Listen to Eliza R. Snow. Please respect her. Please believe her. Okay, Bennett was abusing women. He succeeded in pandering his course on the credulity of unsuspecting by making them believe that he was thus authorized by the prophet. In those articles, there's no reference to divine plural marriage. We aim to put down its opposite. So when Emma says prostitution, polygamy, spiritual wifery, she uses the word spiritual wifery in the Voice of Innocence that Michelle was quoting, and somehow me trying to figure out what's going on. Anyway, so that letter, though, that was March. Here is May 1842. This is the High Council minutes. And it all starts. And you see here on the bottom, I'm not going to read every word. And I was accused of bringing up disturbing. I find some of the stuff Michelle Stone brought up disturbing, you know? But my intent is just to protect someone's testimony. And sometimes bringing up, anyway. I think if you're 13 years old, you could handle this. I don't think every 13-year-old should be expected to. And if you've been through abuse, yeah, you shouldn't be forced to hear descriptions of abuse. That didn't happen. I didn't sit down and describe the abuse of these women and go into great detail. I never did in my videos, and I'm not going to now, but I am going to actually just show these pages today. But I was accused of getting into great detail by someone, and I didn't. Not that it really matters, but especially when that person like Michelle Stone said this. Michelle Stone said saying that all of the women in the Bible that ever lived plural marriage were sex slaves and abused. I'm like, well, there was abuse in church history. I think it's fair to you bring up. I think I brought up something equally as disturbing, right? I do think someone is being dishonest or having memory problems, right? But anyway, a charge against Chauncey L. Higby and is coming up, right? But they knew by March already what Chauncey Higby did. And so Sarah Miller, she was a widow, unchaste, unvirtuous conduct with her and others. And a lot of it happened because they were bringing them food. at least with Catherine Warren, her excuse to, I don't know how many other women did this, but she did get passed from guy to guy. But Chauncey Agaby's like, no, I'm not guilty. No. But then there's 3 witnesses that he did seduce women. He's guilty of unchaste, unvirtuous conduct, and that he was saying, guys, he was saying that it was right to go all the way with a bunch of women, as long as you just don't talk about it, you make it secret, right? People losing their testimonies are believing him and believing Joseph did that. But when you read all the women's statements and you get it in perspective and understand that there was something else going on, this was different. This wasn't celestial flow in marriage, you guys. I think Michelle knows that. A lot of these people know that, but they just put blinders on. So Michelle, just take your blinders off, please. But on motion by Hiram Smith, it was resolved that Chauncey Higby be expelled from the church. Well, do you understand that Higby is attacking Hiram, and the bunch of people are accusing Hiram of living spiritual wifery, and that's what Emma is referencing in The Voice of Innocence. That letter, Joseph was talking about your women should be allowed to be innocent. These Nyman girls should be, we're going to go into that in a second. Their innocence doesn't need to be taken from them, but it was, and I'm sorry if you've been essayed and this disturbs you, but I don't know why I'd be more, it just, whatever. So May 24th, 1842, the High Council met according to the appointments in the lodge room, the testimony of Sarah Miller, Miss Margaret Nyman, Matilda Nyman. They were young. Chauncey Higby was about 20 years old. And they did state in May 29th, 1844, Nauvoo, New Year, 2 years after this, that they were hoping he would change. And it makes sense because he's under the authority of J.C. Bennett. He's almost being forced to do these things, and he was brainwashed. I do believe that, but he still had his agency, and spiritually, he died. But then them saying that was him saying that Joseph Smith threatened his life in the History of the Saints. Often Joseph is accused of threatening someone's life, and he didn't. How many times you were quoting someone else threatening someone's life in your bedroom on the phone or in a video, and you're just quoting someone else, part of the extremist group that follow Julie Rao, and that really was her idea. I almost took that down because maybe it was all just Chad's idea. It actually did come from Julie Rao, so I'm keeping that video up. High Council met in the lodge room, and then they're hearing all these stories. Okay, and I'm not going to show the worst parts of it, but it goes into detail on another page. But Chauncey Higby and others show up the manner of iniquity. And I know with someone, I didn't go into great detail about that. I'm just like, okay, you're saying Michelle Stone says these women were being sex slaves and abused. I'm like, well, that did happen. But it was Chauncey Higby and J.C. Bennett, they were excommunicated. It wasn't Brigham Young. There's no evidence Brigham Young did that. Unfeeble virtue and unhallowed means, and they all. So when you understand that this is all echoed in The Voice of Innocence, it makes sense. But May 25th, 1842, Wednesday, the High Council met and adjourned. William Law is still active at this point, right? But he eventually decides to become best friends with Chauncey Higby, who is being described as an abuser. You think he's pious now? He's not. He's not a good guy. But then people leave the church and they just say that this is all bunk and not true. The charge was fully sustained on motion. It was resolved that he be disfellowshipped until he makes satisfaction. And a lot of other men's names were listed. So there's a lot of men spiritually dying that are not good men. And I don't know if they executed all the men that did this, or how involved. A lot of men didn't answer, but Chauncey was 20. A lot of, unfortunately, younger men. It puts it in perspective. Then you can understand Heber C. Kimball and his young 14-year-old daughter wanting to go to dances and dance with some of these men that they're trying to reform. It all makes sense. And she talks about the sad eyes. She's describing these abused girls. She's probably describing the Nyman sisters in some of her poems, but then people think she's talking about how awful Joseph Smith is, but it's not true. Okay, she's talking about how awful the effects of all this was. She became aware of it later. The defendant confessed the other men and gave the names of several other men. And it does make me mad that some church historians water this down. It's just like 2 high schoolers, that just went too far. It's way worse than that. And I don't like that poor David on Saints Unscripted is trying to get him to at least, can we at least talk about some of the stuff David's trying to get him to, and he couldn't get him. He just said it was, people going too far is what spiritual wifery was. It was abuse. How it was lived in Nauvoo, it was bad. And you think how many people's lives, a judge's life was taken for just trying to get justice against Jeffrey Epstein. And that level of evil was being lived in Nauvoo. But action was being taken by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints against even some of those men who were living plural marriage. Because what that was way worse. Plural marriage is benign to this. Anyway, Catherine Warren, and she was a widow. But I think she did have to repent somewhat, but I think they saw most of them as, and they got her married, and they took care of her. Because she didn't have anyone take care of her. It was like, Hibby is like, I'll bring you food if you'll see that it was a bunch of other men's names, unfortunately, unlawful intercourse with her. But it is explained, and they might have had more information even 2 years later, but by the time the Nauvoo neighbor came out, it's like, he'll keep me with food if I do all this, which then you see all of this is left out of the Nauvoo neighbor 2 years later because it is too disturbing. And I'm not going to read every word of everything, but I'll just show it and see. This is just some of the other names. Here's her picture. Oh, there it is. Now it's gone. And this is why I worked really hard on another video, but I think this is best that I just pull up just these quotes and everything. It can be worth it, but you have to follow the Spirit. And I hope the misery goes away for some of these women like Michelle Stone. Just please acknowledge that something worse than plural marriage happened, and it was called polygamy because it was spiritual wifery, and it was denounced because it was spiritual wifery. The word polygamy became codified to mean plural marriage later on. Today, it means, or there might have been a total misunderstanding in Nauvoo, you guys. But I think so many were so educated, they had a university. Meanings of words change, and that confuses people, and then they just think a bunch of other stuff happened that didn't happen. And I did find, this whole theory from Who Killed Joseph Smith. Can watch my computer get possessed. I don't literally mean possessed. That's Joseph's, and explain the one that has a broken maxilla slightly, that even though Dr. Herod thinks that looks eugenic, meaning it was as they were from the shovel, because all they had were these huge fat shovels digging up these skulls. You might break the maxilla on Joseph Smith, but the tumor